I call Professor Raj Sherry to the chair. So the last public business meeting of the College Historical Society was also held on the 20th of September with Usheen McElhenney in the chair. Anyhow, I'm so glad EU made it tonight to this amazing debate. Reception afterwards is going to be a huge because we're collaborating with CAP. Any CAP heads in the house? That was a very CAP response, I feel. I tried. I guess I wasn't too economical with my puns there. Last week's debate could be interpreted as a debate of supply and demand. And this week we're talking about supply and demand of a different nature, really. But in my case, in the last one, it was really a case of too much demand and no supply. No wonder I dropped economics. Look, Brexit, right? It's not great. I'm supposed to make jokes now, but really Brexit itself is perhaps the biggest joke of all. But anyhow, here are some Brexit jokes that I plagiarised from the internet. So a Scot, a Northern Irish person, and an English person walk into a bar. The English person wanted to leave, so they all had to go. Why do Brits love tea so much? Because tea leaves. And what did the UK say to its trading partners? See EU later. And with that, I will see EU later. The meeting is
And are there any objections to my signing these minutes as a true and accurate account of the last public business meeting? Okay, then I shall duly sign. I should now like to call upon the auditor to introduce the invited guests to the House.
Good evening again, everyone. Our guests for tonight are Raj Sherry in the chair. Professor Raj Sherry is a lecturer in political science here in Trinity and teaches the much loved European politics module, which I would strongly recommend to anybody. And our opposition guest for tonight is Senator Niall O'Donnell. The Senator is a member of the Shannon for Sinn Féin and previous Lord Mayor and Councillor for Belfast. The standing orders for tonight are, as they nearly always are, speeches are 7 minutes in length with the first and last minute. After the first minute, individuals from the floor may offer a point of information, so you stand and offer a small point. Please keep those to no more than 15 seconds in length. And the last minute of every speech is protected. Guest speeches are longer and are 12 minutes in total. So with that, I return to the floor. Oh yes, you will all have on your seats oratory returns as well. It's just a small booklet, which we would all strongly recommend that you fill those out, as we offer prizes at the end of the year to the best speakers and use those to judge the standards of speeches. So with that, I return to the chair.
Okay, so the question before the House this evening is, this House would burn Britain at the Brexit table. And I should now like to call upon Annabelle O'Rourke to propose the motion to the House.
So this is a typical debating thing where we get up our watches just to make sure we don't go over time. So I haven't started yet. Okay. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the HIST. Apparently we've been at the forefront of political activity since 1770, from plotting revolutions to burning down the White House back in 1812. We're essentially the Irish version of the House of Cards, but the drama and scandals are all unfortunately very real. Tonight, it seems, we're turning our attention to that of the burning of Britain in all its Brexit glory. Lighters at the ready. When I first heard this motion, I thought, wow, that's some damn good alliteration. Whoever came up with that is a genius. Then I heard it was our auditor, and I was like, wow, he probably does just want to burn Britain to the ground. The fire will burn bright red like his beloved Labour Party, the true colour of his soul. Then I started to consider what the motion really meant, but couldn't get much further than imagining Angela Merkel looking incredibly fierce across the negotiating table, sending angry memes, gossiping in group chats, writing on windows, that kind of thing. There are, however, several things of importance to discuss, gossiping aside. The decision of Britain to leave the EU market marked an important turning point in its short history, perhaps one of its most important. The decision, however, was not a complete surprise. The rise of the alt-right in both Britain and across Europe has indeed been a cause for concern. Born of economic hardship and an excessive burden placed on citizens in the aftermath of recession, ideas of nationalism and Euro-pessimism have been at the forefront of discussion. It is important, however, to understand the history of the EU, and indeed the reasons for its existence today. The EU was born out of decades of political unrest, poverty, and the threat of warfare. Sure?
Okay. So the line you're going down is the EU's response to World War II. Do you really think it's a good idea to once again have the continent of Europe ganging up in the United Kingdom?
Sorry, dying up?
Ganging
up.
World War II.
Okay. So firstly, Britain did this to themselves. That's going to be the main point for my speech. When David Cameron walks up and goes, hey guys, I'm going to hold a referendum, we're like, you didn't have to though, David. So I'm going to get to that later. But anyway, the pooling of power by sovereign nations was by no means an easy undertaking, and it is indeed a testament to the importance of these issues. Nationalism and a desire to be economically independent were ideologies that needed to be left behind. Economic prosperity has largely reigned in the EU, with its new member states having benefited hugely from membership. Indeed, new countries continue to apply to join the EU.
Question.
No. This unfortunately seems to have largely been forgotten in the new EU political landscape by figures such as Stephen. Indeed, during the Brexit campaign, issues of nationalism, border control, and a lack of democracy within the EU came to the forefront. Brexiteers carefully replaced the voices of academics and economic reason with emotionally and often racially charged sentiments. Facts were misused and misplaced. Look at the issue of migration. Currently, only 2.8% of EU citizens are actually resident in another member state. It gives one a very different view of the state of migration within the EU. It is important to understand that it is not in general the fault of British citizens, however, unlike Stephen, who were misinformed and misled. It is in fact the fault of the political establishment, and namely, as I mentioned earlier, David Cameron. Political gambits such as holding referenda to gain power are foolish at the least, tragic at the most. And when I say tragic, I do mean the kind of tragedy that befell Macbeth, a kingdom swiftly fallen. These issues within British politics, however, are not outliers, as I've already mentioned. The alternative for Deutschland gained incredible ground over the weekend in the German election. A referendum introducing increased border controls was passed in Switzerland, and the Italian five-star movement, a supporter of direct democracy, is becoming increasingly more popular. The political landscape in the EU is swiftly changing. So we can probably agree that Brexit is an unfortunate mishap in the history of Britain. It is not the case that Europe so desires to burn Britain, but unfortunately there is no other option. So you may be asking yourself, what does burning Britain at the Brexit table look like? Essentially it means that we, the EU, will not be giving Britain what it ideally wants, which is access to the single market and continued residency for British expats across the EU. This has been coined a soft Brexit. In fact, we'll be giving Britain exactly what they asked for, namely control of their own borders and complete sovereignty outside of EU influence and legislation. This, of course, comes at a heavy price, and unlike what Boris Johnson believes, Britain cannot have its cake and eat it, and as such, the hard Brexit was born. Britain essentially wants to leave the EU and somehow keep all the benefits. It's kind of like telling your long-term boyfriend that you want to break up, but want to become friends with benefits. Odds are it probably won't go too well, no matter how good you think you are in bed, or in this case, how important you think you are to the economy. Indeed, the idea that Britain could have complete access to the EU single market and control their borders is itself a paradox. The foundation of the single market is that of its four freedoms: freedom of goods, services, capital, and people. Moreover, the rules of the game are defined by the European Court of Justice. So if one wishes not to be beholden to them, one cannot play the game. In all honesty,
Question?
no thank you, we are not burning them. Truly, we are accepting their decision and allowing them to see the mistakes they have made. Essentially, the kitchen was set on fire in the Great British Break-Off.
Annabelle.
No thank you, Stephen. If anyone else, but no. In light of this, the question must be asked, are common rules of engagement truly necessary for the membership of the single market? Firstly, it's important to understand that the EU's economic union is a complex political and economic alliance of nations. As members of the union, these countries are hugely dependent on each other, and their individual actions can directly affect their fellow members. I think it would be easier, however, to think of the single market in the context of a football match. No one would enter into a game where players got to abide by different and often preferential rules. The Commission acts as a referee of the market, ensuring that all rules are followed. For any major disagreements, the referee's decision can be appealed to the Court of Justice. The importance of these rules can be particularly seen in the case of competition policy. Competition policy defines the rules of the game and prevents any actors taking advantage. The simplest of cases arise due to anti-competitive mergers, which have resulted in the unnecessary creation of monopolies. This was indeed the case when the European Commission blocked Ryanair's attempted acquisition of Aer Lingus. Moreover, a key element of the single market is the harmonisation of regulatory policy. I'm going to keep talking, Eamon, because I'm not finished. The enforcement of equal standards for goods and services prevents corporations from profiting on less strict regulations through cross-border trading. Once a good enters the single market, it can be traded across the EU and therefore must follow our rules. This was particularly applied in the case of developing a common trade policy with countries such as Canada and Japan. So when we look to Britain and its belief that it, like Jose Mourinho, is a special one, we can do nothing but laugh. So ultimately, I just have my little conclusion, I promise. Ultimately, Britain has three main options. It can exit the EU, keep its election promises, and become a wasteland. Some may call it peace. Or it can remain in the EU and continue to benefit from one of the most powerful trading blocs in the world. Or it can concede both power and democratic representation and take on similar economic stances to that of Norway and Iceland. The decision of Britain to leave the EU cannot and will not be something that is taken lightly. Thank you.
Okay, so I'd now like to call on Mark Hennessy to propose the motion to the House.
In approaching this debate, I don't think Annabelle has been particularly sincere as to what burn actually means. Because burn is not, oh, well, if we give Britain anything else but a hard Brexit, or sorry, a soft Brexit, we'll see this collapse of Europe. Rather, when we're looking at what burn actually means, we have to acknowledge that to burn something is to destroy it, right? To burn something is to burn it to the ground. He watched his restaurant burn to the ground. Doesn't imply that Britain can like swan in with their customs. Oh well, the tariffs on our trade have been raised. But at the same time, the EU still exists. Britain still exists. To burn, frankly, in the context of the EU, in the context of Britain, means to sever our ties with the British government, with the British state, right? And burning Britain, in that case, is indeed not a stance that you can earnestly hold as an actual policy. And I get the urgent appeal of, isn't it funny to watch the British government kind of flounder around, not really achieve anything, lose their majority, suffer from it, collapse in the street, falter to the EU, But honestly, once we actually start thinking about what burning Britain as a policy means, we have to associate ourselves with the actual effects of it, rather than just, smart rhetoric about why, burning Britain is great. And the first thing to consider is pretty obvious. If anyone knows me better, I do economics, guys. Globalization and global relations, whether your perspective is from an Irish one or a European one, is good. You know, it's a positive thing. Maintaining good relations with foreign countries enables us to travel, reduces war amongst states, gives us benefits in research and education and public policy and EU antitrust competition at Annabelle. And, you know, in healthcare, and of course it also gives us trade, right? And European trade has heavily contributed to the growth of every European country involved in it. And basically, the more trade we have, the better off everyone is in general. You know, the better off we as a society are, and the more powerful we are as a collective entity. And, you know, so international relations in general, we can say that it's obviously important to society to not burn Brexit, right? And now we look at the Brexit case. We should not let the desires of Britain set our foreign policy, right? Because it clearly makes sense to pursue a strategy whereby we maintain as much of this mutually beneficial relationship as possible with each other, right? Because the benefits from our relationship with Britain are massive. You know, we're culturally and economically tied to them. 3 billion euros cross the north-south border every day in trade. And, you know, we're linked to them. They're our largest individual export market, and we're linked to them in so many historical ways and in so many institutions as well. And, you know, this is the current policy stance if you look at the reception of the EU towards the Brexit negotiations, right? Because the position document published by the European Union refers to the desire to have the United Kingdom as a close partner in the future. And I think there is leeway between totally burning Britain, having no relationship with them whatsoever, and what is currently being pursued by the EU in this respect. In that when we're actually looking at these negotiations, we should look to actually save as much of this mutual beneficial relationship as possible, you know, and actually foster it. And, you know, like, this is a clear policy stance in a variety of areas as well. You know, Macron stated that he would welcome a return of Britain to the EU in the future, and the general position has always been, you know, pro-Britain, a pro-relationship with Britain in the future. You know, and burning Britain would be a reversal of the stance, because it implies that we actively aim to harm Britain through trade barriers, we'd refuse international cooperation, and we'd refuse general efforts to have a partnership in the future. And for what outcome? Because if we're extremely successful in the pursuit, and we manage to burn our ties with Britain, we manage to burn Britain at the negotiating table, then we win nothing. The EU and Ireland is weakened by this. The notion of needing a hard Brexit to convince people that, you know, oh, well, Britain has been, I'll take it in a second, Britain has been hard on Britain, so that would convince people. I'll take it at the end of my point, actually. You know, it's totally misguided, because even populists are always looking for an institution or group to blame, right? In the case of British populism, it's the EU, sure. But the same dislike can just as easily be targeted towards immigrants, the tax service, technology, the government. And we see this everywhere. It's not like Brexit or populism is a solely British or European or American or indeed, you know, global thing. It is everywhere. And populism is really a symptom of an illness, which is a lack of prosperity. And by weakening Britain, we're weakening our collective prosperity and thus encouraging populism. Yeah. Is
the EU not weakened by allowing any member to leave and be treated favourably under your mechanism?
Treated favourably is, you know, that's setting the terms of what's being discussed. Well, I mean, the thing is, though, that when it's not favourable, in that when we look at the actual how Britain are doing in the negotiations at the moment, right? Like, you know, they left, and originally they were like, oh, our trade deals are going to go really well. You know, we're going to get huge trade deals, and the EU will beg us to have single market access again at any cost, or at any cost to the EU, right? And then once negotiations start, you know, David Davis is confident that this will be the row of the summer. That when that the sequencing of the debates will be the row of the summer. And then he himself concedes that, like, in the area of financial obligations, the Northern Irish border, and all the other things, putting that before an EU-UK trade deal would disadvantage Britain. And this is the words of David Davis himself. And then what we see later on is, you know, the British pound continues to spiral, wages in Britain stagnate, And then David Davis loses this row. They agree to sequence it in favour of what the EU wanted. Then the Conservatives lose their majority. Their ability to negotiate is really weakened, right? And then the British government asks for a transition period of 2 years, effectively conceding that they can no longer handle the negotiations, which when they went into it were extremely confident that they were going to handle it in 2 years. And then, you know, and then we continue to seize these concessions. And as much as with the Labour Party, Paul's look, the Labour Party, you know, being in support of the single market to shift in the electorate towards like stances which are pro-European, not being taken down as they have been in the past, you know, and Britain is losing the negotiations at the moment. They're floundering the negotiations, and they're not doing well. I don't see a reason to burn what is already struggling. Thank you.
Okay, so now I'd like to call on David Kennedy, who was the librarian of the HIST in 1981. So welcome.
Mr. Chairman, Auditor, members of the committee, it's nearly 37 years since I was here last, and all I can say is this, is that I do feel like an undergraduate because I've come back again to do it all over. It's poignant, the terminology chosen for tonight's debate, in my mind, because it trespasses into an area that's sensitive when we recall that the Grenfell Tower disaster is only several months behind us. So the context of burning anybody is something that we should be very conscious of when you bear in mind what happened there. And what happened there was in some respect a torch which explains so much of what's wrong with Britain and what requires exorcising. The subtext in the elite opinion, never vocalised, but always there, was who were all these people living in this building? Why weren't they really English? And what were they doing living in Kensington being paid for by us? Because the people who died in the Grenfell Tower did not fit the British stereotype. John Bull, the RAF, Her Majesty the Queen, it didn't fit their white Anglo-Saxon stereotype. And what we see with Brexit is accumulation of tensions within the United Kingdom. At one lower level, the Daily Mail and the Mirror are what I would describe as the cheerleaders of that nasty, vicious xenophobia. At the other level, couched in better language, the Daily Telegraph, the House of Commons, and people like Jacob Rees-Mogg. They also share that visceral hatred of the foreigner, that visceral non-English. And when we talk about Brexit and we talk about Britain, let's remember it's really the English. Because all of their interests are theirs. And always remember and never forget that Albion's perfidy has never gone away. Watch what they will do to Gibraltar in these negotiations. Watch what they will do to Northern Ireland and are already doing. Watch what they will do to us. They say fine words, they say good things, but it is meaningless. Because if you've seen the disaster of their presentation in the last 18 months since they had their vote, it's only now that they have some class of a collective consensus that, yeah, we want out, but we want the benefits, and yeah, we want a bit more time to do it. If you can remember 18 months ago, Brexit meant Brexit. It meant 29th of March 2019, out the door, good night Irene to the rest of us. That's all shifted and it's moved. Then you've got to ask yourself, what's behind all of this? There is a deep-seated ignorance, not just an economic malaise in the north of England. There's a deep-seated ignorance towards the foreigner. I'm old enough or young enough to remember that when we travelled in the pre-Ryanair days and were ripped off by Aer Lingus, when you went on your holidays, the Odeon was reserved for the Germans because they were always down first in the morning and had the best places at the pool or the beach. You all travel now, thanks to Ryanair. You've all interrailed, you've done things that I should have done and didn't. But I'll bet you'll have found, or you've said to yourself when you're in an airport, anywhere, even in Britain, or England, France, Germany, or a rail station, or even getting on some class of public transport. Who are the most odious Europeans now? It's the English. They're rude, usually intoxicated, loud, noxious, they dress appallingly. And there are several layers of that misbehaviour. I would be very familiar with many of them who live in the southern Mediterranean. I'll take your question.
Ireland locks up immigrants in this country up in detention camps. Sweden oppresses minorities from the Balkans. And Germany, France ghettoise black people. How is that any different in Britain than it is in the rest of Europe? And can you just leave Britain alone for this?
There is no difference, except we will continue to share a body of law that will require us to meet a minimum standard. They abjure that. They won't live to that standard. They will live to their own standard. It will become selective. It will become Trumpian. That's the choice that they have chosen for themselves. And it is a racial choice. Not underestimate that view. They want to select, they want to pick and choose from who wants to come to Britain. Not out of any sense of generosity. It's more out of self-interest. Remember that. And this is the key point I wanted to make. Why the conflagration is necessary. Please.
How can you object to Britain treating certain groups of society badly by also treating them badly?
For this reason, if you bear me out, what I'm urging you to consider, and why I'm urging you to consider to vote for the proposition, is that the elites in Britain who are actually fronting the xenophobia and the ignorance behind it, they have a mindset that, to me, reading the books, reminds me of the leadership of the Confederacy of the United States. People like Jefferson Davis and Robert Lee were not stupid men. They were educated, they weren't ignorant men, but yet they stood over slavery. People like John Redwood, a vicious anti-European, is not a stupid man. Boris Johnson is a careerist, but not a stupid man. Why are these people, Jacob Reed-Mogg, not a stupid man either, but why are these people so adamant about an absolute divorce? An absolute divorce is what they want. And what is it in their mind that you have to ask yourselves that prevents them from seeing the bigger picture, the one that Lord Heseltine sees, that Ken Brown sees, that Anna Salisbury sees, that Nick Clegg paid the price for? These people who see the benefits to Europe and to Britain, not England, Britain, by members. What differentiates them from one another, the Jefferson Davises of the Brexiteers, is their self-perception, their self-image. And it's no coincidence that what was the big movie of the summer for the Brits? Dunkirk. Another celebration of failure.
Shame.
Absolutely. They look back to days where they perceive themselves having influence and power and prominence. They don't realise the rest of us have moved on. The world has moved on. The Germans aren't the enemy anymore. The enemy is somewhere in the Middle East, somewhere in Asia.
Sir, excuse me if this is too frank, but aside from some seemingly bigotry going on towards the British people here, what else do you think would benefit Ireland or the European Union from separating their ties, given that they are our largest trading partner?
Well, the first answer is this, is that it has done one thing beneficial for all of us. The European project has become much more self-confident with the departure of the Brits. Much better for us. Varoufakis, Cyprus, the hardest lefties in Europe, they do agree that Europe is better It's not a great Europe. It's a Europe that requires change, but it's better than what else is available. So that's the point, is that let them go. And the reason why I'm recommending this motion to you is that it's only by departure, it's only by their self-immolation that they can purge themselves of their own negative mindset. And I'm afraid it won't be in my lifetime, but it might be in yours, when the people, the younger people of Britain, have the opportunity to re-enter the full life of Europe. Because contrary to what they say, Brexit does mean Brexit, and it does mean leaving Europe. Culturally, not just economically, culturally, societally, because they want to identify themselves by their distinction. Now, we don't have to do very much to burn their table. They're doing that very well for themselves. Let them at it. I urge them all.
Yeah, I actually.
Gurmaig a Caharley ball Christia a Guinea Ush Lucas a Carja to Glyndor McCreeville an Octon an hour as in Cursa August and Rune Shaw a flay. Folks, I just want to preface my remarks by saying I spent 3 hours in the Justice Committee this morning across from the Policing Authority. I spoke on private members' business in the Shannon for 2 hours and then on a separate bill for 3 hours. So I apologise in advance if I take us into an entire different sphere during the course of my contribution. But I want to also say from the get-go that I have to wonder, as I sat and listened to the contributions thus far, who in Sinn Féin I offended for me to be sent to argue in favour of this, or against, should I say, this motion here tonight. You'll probably sense my natural political and philosophical inclination is, of course, to watch the Brits self-flagellate themselves. But for the purpose of this august society, I'm going to practice the advice that they have given me and directed me accordingly. There was a joke made by our first contributor in relation to the 3 guys walking in to the bar. And I want to start by saying this because this will be a thread woven through the rest of my contribution. If you think it's going to be hard to get me out of a bar, you want to see trying to get me out of Europe. Because if you want to burn the Brits, unfortunately, you're going to burn me. And when I spoke to David beforehand, I said this. He was worried about had he prepared enough. I says, you've prepared far more than me. But what I have is the added advantage of props. So think when you come to the issue of what this motion is seeking to do. Think because of the uniqueness of our society here. Think because of the incredible political scenario we now find ourselves in across the entirety of this island. When you burn the Brits, you burn me. Through no fault of my own, through an accident of geography and timeline, I am born in the north of Ireland. I'm an Irish citizen. That right was conferred on me by the Good Friday Agreement, which was endorsed by referenda, both north and south. Because I am an Irish citizen, I am also a citizen of Europe. And if you think there is a degree of uncertainty about the big philosophical, macro political issues, you want to try and place yourself in the shoes and the uncertainty that surrounds those of us who are caught in this victimhood. And I use the term victimhood very, very cautiously. And I'll tell you why. Don't think about that word when I say it as being too literal. On one level, I tell you I'm not a victim. But in this scenario, I have to concede that if we burn the Brits, I will become a further victim. I'm a victim in the first instance of partition. And I'm a victim in the second instance of a Brexit, which I voted against, along with the majority of people who live in the northeastern part of this country. I wanted to try and take a straw poll, and before I do, I just want to show you this. I got this today, just for added dynamic and added punch. This is my diplomatic passport. So I have 2 Irish passports, and yet I am in danger. I am in very real danger, in very real risk of falling foul to not just the self-flagellation, the idiocy, the I believe much of what David said in terms of what drove the referenda. There is no question about that. Issues of race, issues of immigration, issues of good old-fashioned John Bullery. But do bear in mind that we are caught in the middle. So if you burn the Brits, you burn Ireland. So I have a big enough argument with the Irish government most days in the week in Shannon for them to acknowledge and respect and enact in legislative form my rights as an Irish citizen. They are quite reluctant to do so. But yet when I sat across from Guy Verhofstadt in both Stormont last Tuesday and the Dáil Chamber last Wednesday, he was much more authoritative in defending our rights as EU citizens. But I don't want to take that punt. I don't want Guy Verhofstadt in the course of a negotiation, because you will afford me this. Sinn Féin know 1 or 2 things about negotiations. So I don't want, in the midst of a public negotiation which is playing out back and forward between Britain and the EU, just for a bit of promise and for honeyed words. Yes, absolutely.
Not to be too blunt, but isn't it the dream of Sinn Féin to have such a useful tool as saying, look at what the EU is about to do to Britain, let's go join Ireland? That's all I'm going to say.
Well, I'll make the point that ultimately, for us, the ultimate aspiration is the reunification of the country. Does Brexit bring that closer? Perhaps it does. I think many people would argue the economic case for Irish unity because of the imposition of Brexit. But I'll tell you this, much like I don't want to take the chance or take the punt in relation to the EU ensuring our rights are upheld, I have zero confidence in the Irish government currently arguing a pathway or seeing that as the best outcome or the best resolution for us. So again, I say very heartfeltly and very sincerely, if you burn the Brits, you burn me. If you burn the Brits, you burn the 56% of people in the north from every walk of life, from every tradition, from every cultural and political background who want to remain in the EU. I previously represented Pottinger constituency in East Belfast. East Belfast is still, to put it in its crudest terms, and you'll forgive me for doing so, East Belfast is still statistically the most Protestant constituency, electoral constituency in the north of Ireland. It is the birthplace of the Ulster Volunteer Force. It is a staunch, die-hard loyalist community in the shadow of the Harland and Wolff shipyard. The post office on the Newtonards Road in the days after the referendum ran out of Irish passport application forms because there is a sheer panic beginning to emerge at the decision in England and in Wales to drag this part of Ireland out of the EU against our will. So if you burn the Brits, you burn us. If you burn the Brits, you burn peace funding that has gone into the north for the last 20 years and has made huge, significant change to communities impacted most by the conflict in the north. If you burn the Brits, you burn the Regional Development Fund, supporting farmers along the border corridor. What happens to those individuals when, yes, there is an niggling and maybe a bit of a primal urge in all of us to watch the Brits continue to self-flagellate themselves even further. So, the point was made by one of our, Annabelle, was it? Annabelle said earlier about the friends with benefits issue, and when I heard that, I couldn't help but think, Guy Verhofstadt, who is the, for anyone who doesn't know, is the European Parliament's coordinator on Brexit, didn't quite use those terms, but he more or less implied it, that is what the Brits want. And they're chancers. I know they're chancers. They have a brass neck. And they are, as we would say, to use a Belfast colloquialism, they are at it. They are chancing their arm, and From my perspective, listening to during conversations with Verhofstadt and indeed with Michel Barnier, it's very, very clear that for once the European Union know that they're at it. So the case I made to those gentlemen, quite ironically, as a very proud and repentant Irish Republican, was if you're going to burn the Brits, leave us to the one side. Acknowledge, accept that Ireland has benefited exponentially and will continue to, have no doubt. Yes?
Northern Ireland can be joined the Republic and by virtue of the European Union at any point under the Good Friday Agreement. Why does most of what you say matter, and what about the broader picture of the EU in general?
Because it's happening now. And while the practicalities of Irish reunification I would like to see enacted yesterday, there is no hurry either by the British Secretary of State to bring that referendum forward. And unfortunately, there is no action from the Irish government to say we have an obligation to defend the potentially 1.5 million people in the north who are Irish citizens. I say to them, stand up for us. I say to them, defend us. I say to them, if the Brits are going to be burnt, you bring the fire engines to us. They did it from Dublin during the Blitz. So my message is very, very clear in that regard. So I say, Mar Uncle Skur as my final word. I struggled to argue elements of the position that I was asked to argue this evening. I hope you understand and I hope you appreciate that when I refer to myself in the singular, again, a bit of an irony, I'm going way off track tonight, it's a bit like a royal we. When I say I mean we. So just think about that before voting for this motion. It's easy, and many of us would love to kick the Brits while they're down, given the history of this place. But think about the unique dynamic of the politics that exist on this island currently. The Brits are on course for, I believe, disastrous consequences, given the position that they have voted to endorse. I believe that all of what David said in terms of the very cynical and negative motivations behind that. I believe because, against our will, we were latched on to that particular entity a long time ago. I believe, and I will finish on another football skirt, I believe that we can offset the worst elements of Brexit on Ireland. So I implore you not to self-flagellate yourselves. And that's advice always that I will give. But in relation to this motion, don't vote for it. Because if you burn the Brits, sadly, against my will, you burn me. Gordon White.
I've been thinking being the first one of this meeting, so this is, I'm going to mention this as well.
My goodness, that's not an easy speech to follow. In terms of the Northern Irish Brexit vote, I absolutely sympathise. I only wish English voters had too.
They never do.
The way I have thought about this debate, and I think it's like relatively okay for the way it's been debated so far, is that burning the Brits means we want to see all Commission negotiation points realised, and UK can either agree to that or face a hard Brexit. And you know, in that case, I can hope that UK would just do everything that Europe wants, get burned, but Northern Ireland would still be fine. So I think then we're all still on this side of the table. So yeah, that's what burning means to me. No passporting of financial services if there's no port freedoms, stuff like that. But first off, I'd just like to make it clear, I have nothing against Britain as a place, British people. In fact, like this summer, I became a British taxpayer. It's like Britain is the only country where I'm actually like a net fiscal contributor. So nothing against that. Sadly, however, the way the British political leadership has chosen to define both the exit negotiations and the referendum debate can only end in British tears, or even more specifically, Boris Johnson's tears. I will bring you 3 points tonight, and they have 3 buzzwords. So let's just first talk about kind of the money side of this. Then let's talk about liberalism and how, like, giving unto Britain would be fundamentally against what European Union stands for. And then let's just talk about how Britain has always been treated exceptionally in the European Union and how that must end. Yeah, and I hope by the end of my speech tonight, you will be convinced that the Brits have simply misunderstood how the European Union works, and relatively punishing them, burning them, will clear everyone's minds on the topic across Europe. So first, let's talk about money. It is undoubtable that the European Union has an advantage in these negotiations. If you look at UK and EU official data, the UK, exports to the EU countries make up 12% of the value of the British economy in 2016. On the other side of the table, we're only talking about 3 to 4% of the EU economy in 2015. And like even the conservative assessments of UK's long-term GDP loss from a hard Brexit range from 1 to 5%, which is a lot. As for tariffs, like while in absolute amount EU would end up paying more, if you divide it by either population or GDP, actually UK is still losing out, like quite expectedly based on those figures. And you know, political scientists who look at international negotiations, they're pretty clear what should happen when we have such an imbalanced situation. So usually the country that has like the best alternative to the agreement, the country that is best set to walk away, will be the one who comes up with the best outcome. And like, to be honest, if we don't play all of our cards, that just means that like all European citizens are giving a free subsidy to the British people, and I think we should reject that. So that's the end of my first point. As to liberalism, I think Britain just does not understand what the EU is like as an institution. And like, if we want to keep on defining the European Union in a way that makes any sense for it to continue to exist, we can't just operate EU a la carte. And you know, there can be debate about this. I think that there are like 2 main perspectives, and a lot of like disagreement about the European Union springs from those 2 perspectives. So if we like go into economics a bit and borrow terminology from game theory, we could say that like you can either think about the European Union as a zero-sum game, or you can think about it as a coordination problem. And which perspective you choose really determines what you think you have to get in. So if you think that like the European Union just is this political entity that creates like no value of its own, then it's actually kind of fair enough to be nationalist. Like there's just nothing added, it's just a vehicle to redistribute the value that is already being generated in the member states. However, if like already Mark here discussed very nicely, you think that actually like open trade is a really good thing, and you think that the European Union is a mechanism for like this shared economy, if you just hold like these beliefs about open economy that you might learn in Leaving Cert Economics or like first year macroeconomics, you probably will agree that there's a lot of value being generated by the EU. And additional to this, obviously there's like more abstract kind of soft, nice benefits like European peace, increased opportunities for European people like myself, who I am a migrant in this country. A key point, however, is that if you believe in these benefits, you're also more than likely to accept that these huge benefits will like limit the sovereignty of your state as a participant in this social contract. And this is simply because the European Union is huge, and to regulate it, we need to be immediate, we need to have centralized regulation, we need to have a tribunal that decides on everything, and that's what we'd accepted. Yeah.
The United States cultivated the biggest trade deal in the history of humanity with NAFTA and TPP. What sort of political union was there? Well,
that's not quite the same thing as having an open market, Stephen, and you definitely do know that. There's no free movement of there's no free movement of people. There's other limitations as well.
And the Americans have a bigger stick.
Okay. Yeah, that too. So yeah, I think like the way the EU is set up, the amazing benefits like economies of scale, dynamicism it provides, like they totally justify like the 4 freedoms, European Court of Justice, bigger price in Brazil, everything, and that's fine. And like in an open economy, we all have to agree to play by those rules. Like if we are a group of countries producing this amazing public good, then we also have to agree to share these burdens. And if Brits don't want to obey that, there's no way we can let them free ride on our public good. And of course, I'm not. Okay, yeah, no time for that. So yeah, if we let a country free ride, no matter how large and no matter how much of an empire it was 100 years ago, we will be in trouble. Exceptions matter. The European system, it's only a system that is upheld by humans. And if we want to keep it rational, if we want to keep it in the form that it currently is, we will have to fight for it, and we will have to be willing to accept economic costs to maintain this status quo. Final more point. Yeah, the Brits, they've got a lot of money back from the EU. They've been able to insult us in our own European Parliament, and that has to end. If Britain wants to stay in the Europe, it should give it the value it deserves. Britain should pay. Thank you very much.
Hello there. Whenever I first wrote this speech, I was really banking that I'd be the first Northerner to speak. And while it was a great speech and all that, my confidence slowly evaporated as I hear oh, I was going to say that. That's a great point. Oh, wait. And as my confidence slowly evaporated, my notes have frankly became rather useless. But let's continue anyways. But just before I go on, I suppose I just would rather comment on what some of the proposition has said. And I suppose Annabelle and Anna's points was generally pointing that we should maintain the status quo. If the Britons wants to leave, we should burn them. And that's all very good, but as Mark said, though, is if we sort of hinder trade between the countries, that's going to harm that's going to harm both unions, both the Union of Britain and the Union of Europe. The simple matter is, free trade, it has empirically been shown, even if only one country does it, it will benefit both countries. And you think raising tariffs against each other, that's called a trade war. While that might sound great and a nice, soundbite in the newspaper, we raise tariffs, we show the Brits what's what. I mean, Anna,
trade is great. We want to keep the European Union working for the next 100 years. We pay a bit now, we make everyone obey, we'll be fine in the future, and nobody's going to try to free ride.
See, economics, so international trade isn't a free ride. That's the thing, though. See, you're conflating the problem. The problem is you're saying obey. Now, that's a very... I know for an audience of Irish people, I'm very surprised by an eager rush to obey another foreign power, given the struggles of this republic to actually grant your independence from someone else. But despite the huge economic costs of leaving, no, Annabelle. But even regardless, if the EU punishes Britain, burns it, they're going to harm themselves. The trade between both countries is horrific. Is quite large to begin. If that's gone, you're only harming yourself. And I suppose even to the distinguished guests, while as much as I enjoy bashing the Brits as the next Northerner, and I've no compunction in thinking of the Brits as racist, I would not necessarily think that the Irish state or any European state is better. I would earlier remark that it was only a couple of months ago that the Irish state made Irish travellers an ethnic minority after how many countless years of UN reports calling upon the Irish states, asking them to be made an ethnic minority. This is the very same state that called in the 60s, 20 years after the Second World War, calling for a final solution to Irish travellers. And that's just one group. I wouldn't want to be a Roma, frankly, anywhere in Europe. And even the human rights, that depends on how well it's applied. And I'm not really sure that the Europe is necessarily going to be better than the British. But saying that though, I do agree, the Brits are racist. But moving on to my point, Northern Ireland, what is the real problem if we burn Britain? As the speaker did say, Britain should not be conflated with England. 2 of the 4 countries in the United Kingdom voted to remain. Northern Ireland, Scotland. Northern Ireland, as you know, is the only UK state that actually borders the European Union. So what will burning Britain mean? It's going to mean the loss of €225 million sterling that is spent on the peace process in Northern Ireland. That's a fraction of the 3.5 billion which is spent overall in the country. Now that money goes, who do you think is going to step in? Will it be Britain? I don't think so, because they're going to be very poor in the foreseeable future. So what does that leave when once all that money goes away? Who do you think is going to pay for all this police and peace process missions? No one. So where does it leave Northern Ireland? Frankly, at the risk of being destabilised. And as much as I would enjoy seeing the UK being stabilised, I don't enjoy thinking that when I cross the bus back home, I may have to go back through what my parents lived through, and that's a thought I would rather not indulge in. Because there's even moving on vote as well. How will it be enforced? If they're going to burn them, they're going to need a hard border. Can a hard border be enforced? I think not. My main rationale would be that the British Army couldn't do it during the Troubles. I can't see it being more successful during this post-Brexit utopia that the English think is going to come about. But even regarding that, it's the height of stupidity to really imperil the only country in the EU that has, as the person says, has both Irish citizens as well as British citizens. Go on, Anna.
What is the EU really doing to Northern Ireland? All we're trying to do is give Britain, or at least as you say, England, what they want, control of their borders, and not to be beholden to the European justice. There's no way we can't have a customs border. There's no way we can't have a border that prevents migration. Like, what do you want? What economic framework are you working under?
Well, to be honest, my simple proposal is that we should not actually make it as hard as possible for Britain to leave the EU. If Britain wants to leave the EU, that's fine, but we should not go out of our way to make it as difficult as possible, to do as much damage as possible, because that benefits no one. What is really the point of really poisoning relations between the UK and the EU? What does that gain to anyone? What threat does that pose to the long-term stability of Europe? Go on, Raymond.
If Britain isn't harmed or, say, burnt when it leaves the EU, what incentive does any other country that's thinking about leaving have to stay in the EU?
Sorry, repeat the first part, Raymond.
If Britain isn't harmed or, say, burnt when it leaves the EU, what incentive does any other country that might think of leaving have to stay in the EU?
My God, I mean, you are a very vindictive person when you want to be. So, at the end of the day, is the EU not a voluntary association of European nations? To the best of my knowledge, it is not a coercive domination. It's not a Zolveron that's imposed by one power upon anyone else. But that would merely be my understanding of the European Union, that it's a voluntary association of European states, which means, being voluntary, any nation has the right to leave if they choose. But does that mean that is that like when you're friends with someone for like maybe 2 weeks and it's like, oh, kind of bored of you now? You won't be pissed off like if I go home, if you give me a lift? Does that mean no, walk, go away from me? Or do you sort of say, no, like, I mean, while I regret you leaving, if that's your decision, so be it. But that's how I would see it personally. But all in all, simple speaking, I understand, I'm in a southern audience. Most people here might not like the Brits. That's fairly understandable reasons historically for that. But at the end of the day, I think we should oppose burning Brexit for a simple reason. It really, not only is it economically suicide, but also the very severe risk to every northerner in the north of the country, because it is a threat. It is a risk to us. You haven't lived in the place of violence. Luckily, neither have I. But still, my first memory is being a 4-year-old with, admittedly following the advice of cooler, bigger kids, throwing stones at a British armed carrier. And that's the kind of thing I would rather not see coming back to Northern Ireland. And so with that, I beg you to oppose.
Ladies and gentlemen, if you walk up to one of any of the number of communists in the hist, not me, and you ask them how they think it is that communism can succeed, given that almost every implementation of it so far has failed, their response will inevitably be that communism has never been implemented properly. Not in the USSR, not in China, not in Yugoslavia. And this may very well be true. And communism may very well, in fact, be the best system of social organization. Or it may not. But until it is fully implemented in their vision, those people will continue to support it, will continue to tell you about its merits, and will continue to lament about what could have been and what could be if it were implemented properly. Ideas of power, and ideas that are allowed to fester and that promise great progress for the common people will continue to grow unless we allow people to experience the harsh reality of them now. If we give Britain a soft Brexit, we still suffer many of the economic shocks that opposition talk about. But we also allow the Nigel Farages of the world to say, they did not give us the Brexit we wanted. And it allows the far right across Europe to point to Britain and say that a clean break is actually what's needed.
Ronan.
And that's, no thank you, and that's if a soft Brexit fails. But if a soft Brexit works, then it allows the far right across, and Britain gets some sort of control over their borders around it, then that allows the far right across Europe to proclaim that it is possible to have great access to the single market while maintaining control of immigration. At a time when far right sentiment is growing across Europe, this almost inevitably leads to other countries holding similar referenda and other countries voting to leave the bloc. The only way to counter this is to let them experience a Britain without the EU, a Britain in isolation. Boris Johnson says he wants to have his cake and eat it too. Well, I say, let them have their cake. And let them realise that that cake is not the triple chocolate delight that they thought it was going to be, but in fact it's something gross and disgusting, like, I don't know, a carrot cake or something like that. Why would you ever put vegetables in a cake? I don't know. And let's be clear here. Because the 52% of people who voted for Brexit, like whether or not they were misled, they voted for something different to the status quo. The 70% of people in the UK who currently support Brexit, according to a YouGov poll over the summer, presumably also want some meaningful change to the status quo. They do not want integration without representation or the Norway deal where nothing changes except they remove Nigel Farage from the European Parliament, unless of course they were sick of him as the rest of us. What those people want is to take back control over immigration. So, in fact, the UK can never really accept a deal that wouldn't give them control over their borders. To do otherwise would be political suicide, given the rhetoric that surrounded that referendum. No, thank you. And that's something that opposition seems to have missed in this debate when they say, oh, well, we can pursue some sort of soft Brexit where, you know, nothing actually really changes. And as well as that, even if we do pursue some sort of soft Brexit and the UK miraculously agrees to that, we still get some economic shocks, and we further that far-right sentiment in the UK where they say, well, we didn't get the Brexit we want, we should keep fighting for that, and you still get a hard Brexit somewhere down the line. So you just push that date further back. And as well as that, it lends power to the far right and allows them to grow across Europe. So you get a much worse economic downturn when other countries in Europe wish to leave. So we've heard a lot from the opposition about the economic harms of a hard Brexit and the importance of maintaining global ties, that kind of thing. But let's look at what our options actually are here, because there are two main things that Britain wants from Brexit. They want essentially to kind of maintain some sort of membership of the customs union without having to accept rulings from the European Court of Justice, and they want essentially access to the single market while maintaining full control over their borders. So for a soft Brexit to work, they presumably probably won't get these directly. It will be through some sort of trade deal. So let's just look firstly at the Customs Union, and the European Court of Justice. So the big difference between the European Court of Justice and, say, the World Trade Organization or pretty much any other free trade agreement in the world is that the European Court of Justice actually has power. It can actually do things. An example of this is that when Germany and France had tariffs on British beef imports, the European Court of Justice says, hey guys, you can't do that. And Germany and France had to stop. But when the World Trade Organization tried to do something similar for American beef exports, they were like, nah, we'll just keep doing it, thanks. And so, for Britain, the way Britain want to get around this and kind of maintain membership of the customs union is by saying, well, what we should do is say that our regulations are equivalent to EU regulations and vice versa, which basically means that they can push whatever they want onto the EU, and we just kind of have to accept that. I don't think that's something that we should stand over. So realistically, there has to be some sort of customs agreement there, which automatically means there has to be some sort of border with Britain for that. And secondly, Britain wants access to the free market without free movement of people. So first of all, if we actually grant them this, then this fuels and really fuels and legitimizes the far right sentiment in Europe, where they're like, well, we want access to the free market without free movement, and now we can get it, so we should totally just leave. Which does lead to much worse economic downturn, where people no longer are able to leave. And yeah, so no thanks. So not granting them access to the free market, yeah, it will hurt Northern Ireland a bit, and may hurt the rest of us a bit, but it hurts us much less than other countries leaving would. And there is more than one border in Europe that we should care about. And many other countries would be affected similarly to the Northern Republic of Ireland if countries decided to leave. And at the end of the day, whatever version of Brexit you have, given that the whole rhetoric surrounding the UK leaving is them taking control of their borders, presumably there has to be a border somewhere. At the end of the day, that decision rests with the UK and whether they decide to have that border in the north or around the sea. And nothing we debate here today really changes where that border lies. That's up to the UK and outside of the debate. Now look, Stephen, who's speaking last, wants you to believe that this is the EU ganging up on Britain just because they can, like some schoolyard bully who likes to throw his weight around in the playground. This is not that. Yes, we are burning Britain, but not out of spite and not just because we can. This is a calculated decision we need to make in order to preserve the European Union and maintain its integrity. Britain is not the last bastion of the free world that Stephen wants it to be. The EU is. Thank you.
It'll be good. Amen. Good. Look, this is going to sound quite rich coming from me, but let's stop talking about economic jargon and stop political lectures. This is a debate about people's jobs, people's homes, people's family, the conflict that plagued the north of this island for decades. This is actually a debate about people, and people matters. It is not a debate about some failed European project that this side has never told you why was necessarily a good thing. You've been lied to and misdirected to in this proposition case. I'm not going to give you a case that's pro-Brexit or anti-Brexit. I'm going to give you a case of why this is, for any side you could conceivably fall upon in this debate, this is an awful decision that will hurt real people and not just be people in this room who Europe specifically benefits, because those people have been crossed out of this debate. I want to first of all deal with a few things. We got 4 prop speeches in this debate, and we still don't know what burn means, right? Honestly, we're going to make them live up to the commitments they promised. That's not burning, right? That's not what burning means. It means going beyond and making them feel pain for a reason. They didn't want to deal with the reality of what burn means in this debate because their side is inherently flawed in an absurd policy stance. Because in the system of international trade, you can't burn trade partners without burning yourself in the face as well. That's what's been harped on the upbench and largely ignored by the proposition in this debate. I also want to just, this entire thing of they have left our group, now we must punish them as a result. There is a red herring argument that I will deal with, but I first want to give you an analogy, right? If you have a friend, and you've been friends for years, but you don't want to be friends with them anymore, but you want to leave that friend group, do you think it's particularly fair for them to get a glass of wine, throw it on your face, and then attempt to push you down a flight of stairs as a response? That's not a necessarily calm and mature way to actually handle these events. It's funny because it happened to Annabelle. But that's what's happening here. That is the reality of the situation with which we face. Do we punish these people who wish to go their own path? I want to deal with 2 sub-arguments in this. One, is leaving the European Union necessarily a bad thing in a general sense or in this specific case? They have just asserted that it is. They have asserted the EU is the be-end and all of all things, and leaving it is the devil's work. I don't think that's true. I think people genuinely went out there and voted there because they thought the European Union, his project, had failed it. I think people in Greece and the Mediterranean feel this as well quite strongly. I think it is completely reasonable for us not to establish a mandate for essentially punishing any member state that leaves this union in the future for decades to come because it might prevent other people from leaving. I don't think that's a necessarily smart decision to make or a really productive one, especially when it doesn't benefit you in any way. Because they say, this red herring that we get from Eamon and POI that murks all these debates, right? But look, if we don't stop them leaving, others won't leave. I want you to think of how absurd this is if you apply this to people in your life as friends. I think it is an abusive policy that shouldn't ever be tolerated, especially in global economics. I think it is something that countries like, sorry, this is a lot like something China would do, right? You're literally being China for like Taipei. That is typically the analogy here that you actually need to talk about. Also, like, the reason Britain people voted for Brexit and people all around don't like Europe is because see it as this tyrannical megastate. And this tyrannical megastate, once someone leaves it, they decide to hit them over the head with a club, right? That doesn't help your image, right? The racists are still going to be racist, guys. This just says, and they don't really care if it economically makes sense, right, to leave, but as long as they can be racist. So racist people are a red herring this way. Come on, sort of shit out. But they don't actually fall into this because they're not really people that are ever going to be truly affected by it. They're not people who think about this in a rational way or vote in that rational way because, you might get a worse trade deal as a result. So that is the type of absurdity you're dealing with in this type of debate. Because these people aren't people you're actually going to hit and target. Even if they are, I don't see why it is wrong for people to want to leave the European Union. I don't see why it is wrong for a country to want to establish their own laws. I think it is horrendous when a propagandist gets up here and says that Britain is the most racist country in the world, when the European Union as an institution has been one of the most racist institutions in the 21st century, if not also the 20th century. The economic policies of dumpage and regulation in the European Union, blocking free trade from the rest of the world, have ravaged the economies of Africa. They have destroyed agricultural economies there, and they have left people in poverty. You want to talk about, like, oh man, that Swedish person can't move here now, that's the most racist, oppressive thing ever. When the European Union as a project is literally starving people to death. That is the reality of this debate. It's not, that's the reality of the European Union. It is a horrendously racist institution, and it has horrendously racist people. Like Britain say, they don't want to let immigrants in. Neither does the European Union, right? They want to let people in the European Union derive those benefits from it. I don't think that's necessarily the type of racism that actually makes a massive, massive difference in this debate. Most of those people will probably be able to get visas to move anyway, so I think it's absurd to try and play the racism card in this when you're part of the most racist institution in Europe. Second of all, right, what does this actually mean? Because look, let's say you're able to punish Britain and you're able to damage their trade. Europe and the UK are a massive trading partner. They say, it's a small percentage, it's 5% of the people, right? Like, the thing with economics is, 5% is actually a huge number. It is a huge amount of jobs, it is a huge amount of people. And it tends to have cyclical effects, which you didn't get from any of the economists in proposition because they don't want to talk about cyclical effects. 2% GDP hit on Britain cycles through that economy. It means people on the NHS, the most vulnerable people in the society, the immigrants in that society who depend on the welfare state, and those type of most vulnerable people are the people that will likely get hit by this policy. When you try to get more money out of the UK government, that money has to come from somewhere. Like, money is a zero-sum game. It comes from stuff like the NHS. It comes from stuff like that protects, like, victims of abuse. That's the type of money you're going to be taking away from people. That's the reality of this debate. That's the proposition in this debate when they want to hurt them. When they want to hurt UK trade and deny them proper trade deals, that means that people lose their jobs. It means that the same sentiment that led to the European Union negative movement in the UK was people were losing their jobs. I think it'll get a lot worse when the European Union is seen as actually costing massive jobs on a large scale as part of a vindictive scheme. Those immigrants first came and took their jobs, and then they took even more of our jobs. You're making matters worse than what they would be in the status quo where you allow that country to preserve. It also means that everyday people, like your parents, will lose their jobs. It means that less kids will have parents who have jobs. There's more people that have to depend on that state and don't actually have a government that can actually provide, or has a government that's specifically more strained. It means that less people have actual jobs in that economy. That's what trade means. And as we said, this hits Europe as well. You're literally, what's that thing here? Like, you're essentially burning your face to burn your nose, right? That's the type of policy. Look, no matter what you fall on the political spectrum, communist, socialist, Brexit, anti-Brexit, this is just an absurd idea. Oppose.
views. I will now put the question to the House. I will now put the question to the House on the motion. This House would burn Britain at the Brexit table. All those in favour?
Aye.
All those against?
Nay.
Yeah, so I guess that motion is defeated. Is that right? Okay, so as a chair, I'm going to address you. I have not much to say other than this is a very, I suppose it was a lecture in EU politics. Interesting ideas are raised from the different sides. I certainly don't want to say one is better than the other. It's not my prerogative to answer that. Although I do think somebody has taken the EU politics class here with the reference to mergers and acquisitions and Aer Lingus and Ryanair's attempt to take it over. That was great. David's comments on the cultural dimensions of Brexit, I think, very clearly almost said things that we want to say but we don't say. So to them from there, for those, Senator raised some interesting points. I'm really curious to see that diplomatic.
And will you give the other one back?
Yeah.
No.
So how do you ever get your passport confiscated? Could you lose one and still work with this? That's really interesting, huh? And thank you for the theoretically informed being theoretic perspective of that's amazing. That's really good. Look, I have nothing more to say, so I should now like to call upon Mark Hennessy, coordinator of Trinity Economic Forum, to say a few words. And Mark.
These lads were all wrong in my bit. So Trinity Economic Forum is a society that promotes economic and political discussion in issues in Trinity. And our main event is a conference hosted on the 2nd and 3rd of February this year, and it invites like professional academics, rather than Ronan here, to discuss a variety of, public policy, economic, political issues and current affairs, and as well as that, their research. And obviously, I'm sure you'll see some Brexit discussion there as well. If you're up for seeing real professionals discuss these kind of topics, look out for us on Facebook, and tickets will go on sale for the event in January. Additionally, we're hosting some other economic events this year. So our first event is a sports economics panel on how econometrics is used in sports, which is really cool. None of adding statistics to sports to make it more interesting, guys. But yeah, it's on that, and then that'll be on the 16th of February, and we'll have a couple other events during the year as well. If you're interested in getting involved, me and Aisling will be outside. You can't see Aisling because he's outside, but she'll be outside, and I'll also be standing beside her, and then you can come up and talk to us. Thanks, guys.
Society's forthcoming events.
Thanks everybody for coming. I hope you all enjoyed speakers burning each other tonight. Yes, I did spend some time thinking at that point. Maybe that would be appreciated. Yes, so we have next week's debate. This House believes the two-state solution should be abandoned. I would strongly suggest you all come along to that. Our maidens debating competition is starting up next week. If you haven't signed up for that and you're first year looking to get involved in debating, I would suggest you come and talk to Catherine here, our record secretary, who's organising that round, well, all those rounds, I suppose. We also have our UCD novice IB. We're looking for people to sign up to compete in that. It's an intervarsity for individuals who also haven't debated before. So if you're looking to get involved competitively, that would be also a good event to come along to. If you're looking for any updates or any further information on our events, we regularly post them on our Facebook page for Freshers, Kiss Freshers 248, so keep an eye on that as well if you're looking for updates on any of our events. Lastly, before I invite you all to our reception upstairs, those oratory returns I told you about at the start of the debate, if you could give those to Ellen who's standing over there, she will take them off of you. So I return it over to the chairs.
Okay, well, not much more to say other than to thank you all for asking me to share this. It's to our guest speaker and to all the speakers. been quite interesting, and I've learned a lot from this myself. And with this, I call the house adjourned.
Well done. But I didn't finish.
I'm really sorry it wasn't on your side.
I didn't finish my point. They need to be purged.